When we hear about something as devastating as a plane crash, that gut-wrenching feeling of powerlessness, it's natural to feel completely overwhelmed.
Really is.
You see the headlines, you hear the initial reports, and it just feels like something totally out of your control, you know?
Yeah.
But that's really why we're here, to try and cut through some of that noise, to arm you, our listener, with the knowledge, the vital information, so you can actually understand these complex, very tragic events.
And what we'll try to uncover today isn't just about, the mechanics of a crash. It's more like a chilling story, really, that challenges our basic assumptions about safety. It reveals how things that seem unconnected, like, say, maintenance logs and whistleblower claims, can actually tragically come together.
Exactly.
It's all about piecing together this mosaic of facts, observations, often, before any official reports even come out.
Absolutely. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the tragic Air India flight AI-171 crash. It happened in Ahmedabad on June 12th, 2025. And this incident has, well, without a doubt, sent massive shockwaves through the entire aviation world.
Huge.
Our mission here is to unpack the publicly available evidence, dig into the various theories that are swirling around, and ultimately tackle the bigger questions this tragedy raises. Questions for the aviation industry, and most importantly for all of us, for passenger safety. We've meticulously gathered a whole stack of insights for you. We've got crucial passenger videos, stuff captured like right before the crash. We've got expert analysis from seasoned aviation professionals, official statements coming out from investigators, and in-depth reports from major news outlets, too.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to sift through already.
Our goal is really to help you piece together what happened, explore why it might have happened, and understand what this all means for anyone who steps onto an airplane.
Indeed, it's a complex puzzle. Every single piece of information, no matter how small it seems at first, can end up being a vital clue to the bigger picture. We're looking for patterns, anomalies, the sequence of events that led to such a horrific outcome. We're trying to push beyond the surface story to understand the underlying vulnerabilities.
Okay, so let's start by looking at the aircraft itself, because right from the beginning, this wasn't just any plane. The specific Boeing 787 Dreamliner involved in this crash, well, it had a documented history of issues.
That's right.
Just 4 years earlier, back in November 2021, this exact same aircraft, while it was flying from London to Hyderabad, it experienced a pretty significant fuel leak.
Minor, yeah.
No, it was severe enough to force an emergency landing in Turkey. I mean, that's not just a small glitch, right?
Well,
A fuel leak mid-flight points to potential structural problems, maybe system integrity issues that really need serious scrutiny.
absolutely. It immediately raises flags.
And beyond just that one incident, this particular Dreamliner also reportedly had recurring problems with things like windshield cracks and, importantly, battery overheating. These are issues that, as we'll get into later, have actually plagued other Dreamliners in the past. They even led to global groundings of the entire 787 fleet at one point.
And that's a critical point to establish right off the bat. A history of previous incidents, even if they weren't fatal, on the same airframe. That immediately flags it for, let's say, heightened scrutiny during any investigation.
Makes sense.
It strongly suggests the potential underlying vulnerability may be a recurring systemic issue, which then leads investigators to look really closely at its operational context on that specific day. They aren't starting from scratch here. They're looking for connections, looking for patterns.
Right. Which brings us to AI-171's journey on that fateful day. This flight, it was actually scheduled to leave Ahmedabad for London at 1:10 p.m., but it got delayed. It ended up taking off at 1:48 p.m. Now, this wasn't its first flight of the day either. It had already flown from Paris to Delhi, and then from Delhi down to Ahmedabad earlier that morning, so it had already been working.
A busy schedule for the plane then.
Yeah. And this is where a truly, astonishing piece of evidence comes in. A passenger, his name was Akash Vatsa, he actually recorded a video before takeoff noticing some incredibly strange things. Anomalies.
What kind of things?
Well, he saw the wing flaps moving up and down continuously, just constantly, which is an unusual sight, right? It immediately raises questions about maybe hydraulic systems or control system stability.
Definitely unusual for a plane sitting at the gate or taxiing.
And even more concerning, the plane's AC, the air conditioning, wasn't working properly. It was causing significant discomfort among the passengers. People were getting hot, stuffy.
Okay, AC issues.
But it wasn't just the AC. He noted that the entertainment system, the remote controls, even the call buttons and the overhead lights, they were all malfunctioning, just not working right. Passengers, apparently, were resorting to using magazines for entertainment because the screens simply weren't functional.
Wow. That's a that's a fascinating and deeply concerning collection of observations, actually. Well, the comfort, things like AC and entertainment might seem minor on the surface. For someone in aviation, they can be signs of much deeper electrical or power system problems.
Oh, so.
Well, think of it like this. If your car's radio and air conditioning fail at the same time, you don't just assume you need a new radio, right? You start thinking about the battery, the alternator, maybe a whole electrical system.
Okay, yeah.
These seemingly unrelated failures can often point to a systemic issue, not just one broken part. And the fact that the plane landed safely in Ahmedabad earlier that morning at 11:16 a.m., despite these problems Avatsa saw, well, it doesn't make them insignificant. If anything, it makes what happened next even more puzzling and more tragic.
Indeed. So, after it landed in Ahmedabad, the plane went through refueling. This started around 12:20 p.m. and it took 42 minutes. Now, that's a little longer than the usual, say, 30 to 35 minutes for refueling an aircraft this size on a turnaround.
Slightly longer, yeah.
A DGCA official later told the Indian Express that this wasn't necessarily out of the ordinary for a flight with a max payload, meaning it was taking on a full load of fuel for the long trip to London.
Okay, so maybe explainable.
Maybe. While that was happening, passengers were boarding. A total of 242 people got on, 230 passengers, 10 crew members, and the 2 pilots.
Right.
And the flight was under the command of Captain Sumit Sabharwal. This guy was incredibly experienced, 8,200 hours of flying time.
That's a lot of hours.
Alongside him was co-pilot Clive Kundar, who had even more experience, believe it or not, over 10,100 hours. So we're talking about a really seasoned flight crew, people who knew large commercial jets inside out.
And the huge amount of experience for both pilots is such a crucial detail here. It really plays significantly into how we evaluate theories later on of a potential human error. Right.
These aren't rookies. They're seasoned pros trained to handle a whole range of problems and complex aircraft systems. Their training would have drilled fundamental procedures into them, making certain kinds of basic mistakes seem highly, highly improbable.
Which makes the next sequence of events even more perplexing. Almost unbelievable, really. The plane started moving towards the active runway 23, at 1:31 p.m. It got takeoff permission from Ahmedabad Air Traffic Services at 1:34 p.m. And by 1:38.24 p.m., all the pre-flight checks were reportedly completed. Done.
Standard procedure so far.
Yeah, from ATC's perspective, everything looked normal. There were no warnings flagged by the crew, no request to change runways, no mention of needing thrust modifications, no reports of flap adjustments being made. Everything seemed fine. Weather was clear, visibility was good, temperature was a bit high, yeah, but still well within the safe operating limits for takeoff.
So on the surface, a completely normal setup.
Exactly. Everything looked like it was configured for a normal, uneventful departure. And this is where the story just becomes haunting. You have a system designed with so many backups, multiple redundancies. You have an experienced crew apparently following standard pre-flight steps.
Yeah.
So how do these, seemingly minor issues that the passengers saw before takeoff, how do they escalate? Or maybe were they actually pointing to deeper hidden problems all along?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, the apparent all clear during the pre-flight checks, when you put it next to the problem seen earlier and then the catastrophic ending,
Yeah.
it's a huge part of the mystery. It makes you ask, what exactly was being missed? Or maybe obscured?
And now the puzzle really starts to take shape, and tragically, it happens incredibly fast. At 1:48.44 p.m., Air India AI-171 starts its takeoff roll from runway 23. Now, it's important context here. This airport is basically surrounded by densely packed residential areas.
Right, very close to the city.
As the plane began its ascent, lifting off the ground, a crucial and frankly chilling piece of evidence emerged. A 17-year-old local boy named Aryan, he was visiting Ahmedabad, just happened to be on his rooftop nearby.
Wow. Talk about being in the right place or wrong place.
He was filming the takeoff, just innocently wanting to capture a plane lifting off to show his friends. But his video, taken from this unique angle and surprisingly clear for a mobile phone, it became absolutely critical evidence.
What did it show?
It showed something highly unusual, something fundamentally wrong. The plane's landing gear was not retracted, it was still down, extended.
Oh, wow. That visual detail from Arian's video is incredibly stark. It immediately flags a serious anomaly. Landing gear should be retracted almost straight away after liftoff. It's basic procedure to reduce drag, let the plane build speed, and climb efficiently.
Exactly.
Seeing it still extended indicates a very fundamental problem happening right at the start of the flight sequence, a clear deviation from how a normal climb should proceed.
Indeed. So the plane continued its ascent, or rather, it desperately tried to for just a very brief moment. At 1:38.55 p.m., it reached an altitude of only 625 feet above the ground. Just 625 feet.
Very low, dangerously low.
And it couldn't climb any further. It stalled there. And then, mere seconds later, the pilots made that desperate, chilling call to air traffic control. You can almost hear the sheer urgency, the panic in their voices. Thrust not achieved. Falling. Falling. Falling.
Oh my God.
Contact was lost almost immediately after that transmission. ATC tried frantically to get back in touch, but nothing, no response, was over in a flash.
Stepping back for a second, the speed, the nature of that descent, combined with the pilot's desperate call about thrust not achieved and then falling, falling, it strongly suggests a sudden, complete loss of control, probably due to a catastrophic lack of engine power.
Makes sense.
It points away from some gradual, manageable failure towards something abrupt, total, which explains why the time frame was so incredibly short, just seconds between the Mayday call and the impact. The system, the pilots, they simply had no time to respond or recover.
And the impact, when it came, it was just devastating. At 1:39.13 p.m., the plane began its uncontrolled fall. Just 34 seconds after taking off, think about that, barely half a minute in the air, it crashed roughly 1.5 kilometers from the airport.
So close.
Right into a hostile building at BJ Medical College in Magnani Nagar, which, as we said, is a densely populated residential area.
Oh, horrific.
The hostel, just by a grim twist of fate, was in the middle of its lunch break. There were about 35 students gathered in the canteen when the plane hit. The impact was so violent that students, just in sheer terror, started jumping from windows on the second and third floors to escape the inferno, desperate to get away from the burning wreckage.
Unimaginable.
Residents nearby described this deafening bang, feeling like an earthquake had struck, and then immediately plumes of thick black smoke pouring into the sky, debris raining down.
It's a truly horrifying scene, made even more tragic by hitting a civilian building like that, the immediate widespread devastation. The descriptions from witnesses just underscore the immense kinetic energy involved in that crash, the immediate, overwhelming loss. It's a scene that, well, it will undoubtedly stay with those who saw it forever.
In what can only be described as, I guess, a miracle amidst all that horror, there was one sole survivor. Vishwas Kumaramesh, a British citizen. He was sitting in seat 11A, which happened to be right near an emergency exit.
Incredible luck.
He recounted later that his side of the plane, where he was sitting, happened to land facing an empty space. That allowed him to get out through that emergency door right after the impact. Tragically, the other side of the plane was completely blocked by a wall, preventing anyone else from escaping the wreckage.
Just unbelievable. One person out of 242.
Yeah. The government hasn't released an official death toll yet, but the early estimates place it at over 270 people, including those on the ground. It makes this one of history's most horrific, deadliest crashes. The sequence of events is just chillingly fast seconds from that urgent Mayday call to a catastrophic impact. And the details from Arian's video, especially about the landing gear still being down, they're incredibly stark, painting a grim picture right from the very start of this tragedy.
And this is exactly where the core work of aviation accident investigation really kicks in. The combination of the pilot's desperate call and the observed flight characteristics, particularly that lack of climb and the non-retracted landing gear, forms the initial framework for understanding the nature of the failure.
Right.
It points us towards investigating what prevented the aircraft from generating and sustaining the necessary thrust and lift. It lays the groundwork for unraveling this incredibly complex puzzle.
Okay, so let's shift focus now to the immediate aftermath and the tools investigators use. Right after the crash, investigators were on the scene, and their primary tools, the so-called black boxes, were recovered pretty quickly.
Crucial first step.
We're talking about the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, which captures all the sounds in the cockpit dialogue, alarms, ambient noise, and the flight data recorder, the FDR, which meticulously logs thousands of critical flight parameters: altitude, speed, engine performance, control surface positions, you name it.
Thousands of data points per second, yeah.
Together, they form the black box, which is absolutely crucial for understanding what happened in those final moments. It gives an unparalleled, really granular timeline. Now, there was a little bit of controversy initially. Some reports suggested the black box would be sent to the U.S. for investigation.
I remember that.
But the Indian Aviation Ministry quickly stepped in and clarified it would be investigated right there in India, ensuring local oversight and utilizing local expertise.
Which makes sense. And the black box data, once they retrieve it and analyze it, that will be the definitive source for confirming or maybe refuting these initial observations and theories. It provides that granular second-by-second account of the aircraft's state and the crew's actions.
Yeah.
It's indispensable for any thorough investigation. It's really the closest thing we have to actually being inside that cockpit during those final seconds.
Beyond the black box, though, we have other critical pieces of evidence that are already out there, giving us early clues. First, there's the flight radar data. That gives us precise timings, exactly when the plane talked to ATC, what ATC said back when it took off, details about its previous flights that day, its exact altitude, its speed when it reached its highest point, all that stuff.
Provides the objective timeline, yeah.
This information gives us a clear, objective timeline of the flight path. But then we have those two really significant videos. One is that surprisingly high-quality mobile video from 17-year-old Arian, taken from his rooftop, offering that unique perspective. The second is airport CCTV footage, which shows the takeoff and crash, though maybe at a lower quality. Still, it provides an official visual record.
And these external data points, especially the videos, they're incredibly valuable. They provide independent corroboration or maybe contradiction to the internal flight data from the FDR. Visual evidence often offers insights into physical anomalies, things like the landing gear, that might not be immediately obvious just from looking at data streams alone. It helps create a more complete picture of what the aircraft was actually doing in those critical moments.
Which brings us right back to the key observations from Arian's video. As you said, they're incredibly stark and raise immediate red flags. The first one, the landing gear. Clearly visible, clearly extended. This is profoundly abnormal for a plane right after takeoff. Pilots retract the landing gear immediately after liftoff for a very specific reason: to reduce aerodynamic drag. That's the resistance force acting against the plane's motion. Keeping the gear extended is like trying to run with a parachute deployed behind you.
Good analogy.
It severely hampers the aircraft's ability to gain speed and altitude efficiently, makes a safe climb almost impossible. The second crucial observation from that video is about the wing flaps. They were retracted, not deployed.
Also highly unusual for takeoff.
Exactly. Wing flaps, those things on the back edge of the wings, they're deployed during takeoff and landing to increase the wing surface area. This generates more lift at lower speeds and also increases drag a bit, helping the plane climb more steeply initially. For cruising flight, straight and level, they're retracted. So for AI-171 to have its flaps tucked in during takeoff, that's highly unusual and deeply problematic. It further compromised its ability to climb.
This just raises a profoundly important question, doesn't it? These are fundamental flight controls. Their position during takeoff is absolutely critical for generating the lift you need and reducing the drag you don't want to ensure a safe climb. So we're looking at a situation where the aircraft was physically configured in a way that would severely impede its ability to climb and gain thrust, even if the engines themselves were working perfectly fine initially.
So the big question is why?
Exactly. Why were they in that position? Was it a command issue from the cockpit? Did the pilots not configure them correctly? Was it a mechanical failure of the systems themselves? Or maybe was it a consequence of a deeper underlying power problem that actually prevented their proper operation?
This is where the detective work really gets intense, right? Moving from just observing to forming hypotheses, trying to figure out why those landing gear were still down and why the wing flaps were retracted during takeoff. And this brings us to two main theories being discussed right now in aviation circles.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first one is pilot error. The Economic Times, for instance, they floated a theory suggesting that maybe a loud bang, possibly from an engine failure, caused the pilots to panic. And in that panic, they forgot to retract the landing gear. Panic theory.
Another variation on this pilot error theory suggested maybe the co-pilot mistakenly retracted the flaps instead of the landing gear. Hit the wrong lever in a critical moment. This theory puts the blame squarely on the flight crew.
Okay, well, human error is always a factor considered in any aviation incident. There are some very significant counter-arguments to this specific theory, especially regarding such fundamental mistakes.
Like what?
Well, the Boeing Dreamliner, it's equipped with extensive multi-layered warning systems specifically for incorrect flap settings. Pilots would be alerted by numerous visual warning lights right on their main displays. They'd hear auditory signals, maybe even feel tactile feedback if the flaps weren't set correctly for takeoff.
So it wouldn't be subtle.
Not at all. It's designed to be a glaring, multifaceted alert. It's not something you'd easily miss or overlook. Precisely. And let's not forget the experience level of this crew. Captain Sabrawal, over 8,200 hours. Co-pilot Kundar, over 10,100 hours. These were highly experienced pilots, way beyond the minimum requirements.
Right.
It makes such a fundamental, obvious error one that the plane itself would be screaming warnings about seem incredibly unlikely for professionals of their caliber. Plus, aviation expert Captain Sohail Handa weighed in on this. He noted that a Dreamliner should still be able to reach 600 feet even without flaps deployed correctly. And critically, he pointed out that only one engine is technically needed to climb higher than that.
That's a key point.
So if pilot error in flap setting was the sole cause, and let's say only one engine had failed, causing the hypothetical bang, the outcome might not have been so immediate and so catastrophically complete. This strongly suggests something more profound was going on.
Yeah, it really shifts our focus, doesn't it? Away from simple pilot error towards something far more fundamental. If the aircraft couldn't climb effectively, despite having experienced pilots, sophisticated warning systems, and even the theoretical ability to operate on single-engine power, it points towards a more fundamental incapacitation of the aircraft itself.
Exactly.
This leads us away from just a mistake
Yep.
and towards thinking about a catastrophic system failure.
And that leads us directly to theory 2, total power loss. This is where the narrative takes a really dramatic turn, because the evidence for this theory is quite compelling, and it comes directly from that video shot by Arian.
Okay.
Upon closer inspection, if you look very, very carefully in the seconds right after takeoff, you can see a small object deploying from underneath the plane, extending downwards into the airflow.
Deploying, what kind of object?
Well, many experienced pilots and aviation expert, after analyzing this footage frame by frame, have identified this object as a ram air turbine, or RAT.
The RAT. Okay, that is significant. For those listening who might not know, the RAT is basically the aircraft's emergency wind-up power source. It's like a mini wind turbine tucked away, found on almost all modern aircraft, specifically designed for dire emergencies.
Right.
It deploys automatically only when all other primary power sources like the main engine generators or the auxiliary power unit, APU, have failed. As it spins in the airflow, it generates a minimal amount of power, just enough for critical electrical and hydraulic systems.
Just the essentials.
Exactly. It keeps vital flight controls, basic navigation, maybe some communication alive. Activation is a clear, unambiguous, desperate, last resort indication of a major total power system failure. It's the final lifeline.
That's a powerful way to put it. The RAT generates its power from the airflow, right? So the faster and higher the plane is flying, the more effective it is, literally spinning up more power.
Yeah.
The whole point is to give pilots a fighting chance, maybe glide the plane to a safe landing spot, even glide for a considerable distance if they're at a high altitude.
But that's the critical issue here.
Exactly. In the case of AI-171, the plane was at an incredibly low altitude, just 625 feet, and it hadn't gained nearly enough speed for the RAT to be truly effective. It deployed, yes, but it was rendered essentially useless by the circumstances, by the low speed and altitude.
Not enough airflow to generate meaningful power.
Right. And the pilots had less than 30 seconds to react to what was clearly a catastrophic event unfolding. Barely enough time to even process what was happening, let alone figure out a recovery plan.
Zooming out for a moment, the RAT deploying is a profoundly critical piece of evidence. It's an automatic last resort system. Its activation implies a catastrophic power failure where even the backup systems have ceased to function.
It bypasses the pilots, essentially.
Correct. This shifts the focus definitively away from human error and squarely onto systemic or mechanical failures. It's a desperate measure triggered by a desperate situation, and its appearance on Arian's video is a very strong indicator that the aircraft was in severe distress from a core power perspective right from the start.
And there's actually additional evidence, corroborating evidence, that suggests the RAT did deploy. Remember the sole survivor, Vishwas Kumar Ramesh. He reported hearing a loud bang and seeing flickering lights just moments before the crash.
I remember that detail.
Aviation expert and YouTuber Captain Steve Shripner suggests that this loud bang could very well be the distinct sound of the RAT hatch forcefully opening as it deploys into the slipstream. It's not a silent process.
Makes sense. It's deploying mechanically into fast-moving air.
And the flickering lights. Also common during RAT deployment. It apparently draws power from the reserve electric systems just to activate itself, causing a momentary dip or flicker in other systems as power is briefly rerouted.
Okay, consistent symptoms.
Furthermore, if you listen very closely to Arian's video filtering out the main engine roar, you can apparently discern a distinct propeller-like sound. It's different from the normal engine noise of a Dreamliner. People who've compared it side by side with recordings of normal 787 takeoffs say the difference is noticeable, further suggesting the unique whirring sound signature of the R-T's spinning turbine.
So, auditory and experiential evidence seems to back up the visual identification of the RT.
Yeah.
It means we are very likely looking at an aircraft that lost its primary and probably secondary power sources within seconds of takeoff. A truly rare and incredibly dangerous scenario.
Yeah.
The question then becomes the crucial one. Why did the RT deploy? What kind of fundamental power failure triggered this ultimate emergency measure?
So why would a RAT deploy? Experts say there are three main emergency situations that typically trigger its automatic activation. First, a total electrical failure in the aircraft, meaning all power from the main engine generators is lost.
Complete blackout, essentially.
Second, a total hydraulic failure, where the systems that power the flight controls, landing gear, flaps, etc., they cease to function because the hydraulic pressure is gone.
Lost muscle power for the plane.
And third, a dual engine failure, where both of the plane's primary power sources, the engines, stop providing thrust.
Both engines quit.
And it's this last one, dual engine failure, that is just incredibly rare, almost unheard of for a modern twin-engine jet like the Dreamliner. It's so rare, in fact, that records show only about 7 cases of dual engine failure in the last 70 years of commercial aviation history.
It's considered a true black swan event in aviation, simply because of the extensive redundancy built into engine design and all the aircraft systems.
Yeah.
And to have it happen within seconds of takeoff during the most critical phase of flight, that's an even greater statistical improbability.
Wow.
It points to something profoundly wrong happening, something that bypassed or overwhelmed multiple layers of safety mechanisms, the very mechanisms designed precisely to prevent such an occurrence.
And yet, in the case of AI-171, there are 2 key pieces of evidence that strongly point towards dual engine failure as the most likely scenario right now. First, remember the pilot's desperate mayday call to air traffic control?
Thrust not achieved.
Exactly. Thrust not achieved, falling, falling, falling. The phrase, thrust not achieved, directly indicates that the engines were not providing the necessary forward propulsion. Thrust is the force from the engines pushing the plane forward and up. A lack of thrust means the engines weren't working properly, or perhaps not working at all.
Direct statement from the cockpit about the core problem.
Second, the inability to retract the landing gear, which we saw clearly in Arian's video, that could also be a symptom of dual engine failure. The landing gear retraction mechanism relies on the aircraft's hydraulic system. That system, in turn, typically needs power from the engine's generators or sufficient electrical power derived from them to operate. If there wasn't enough power coming from the engines, the hydraulics wouldn't have the pressure needed, and the gear simply couldn't retract.
So the gear being down might not have been a pilot error, but a consequence of power loss.
Exactly. It fits the picture.
And this is paramount when you consider the wider context. Each of these potential causes, electrical, hydraulic, dual engine failure, involves a cascading failure. Modern aircraft, as we've said, are built with redundancies layered upon redundancies. It's like having backups for your backups.
Right.
For total power loss or a dual engine failure to happen, especially within 30 seconds of takeoff, it suggests that multiple layers of protection either failed simultaneously, which is incredibly unlikely, or they were somehow compromised right from the outset. This moves us from thinking about isolated malfunctions to investigating a potential systemic collapse, where several critical systems just stopped working all at once.
Okay, so if dual engine failure did indeed occur, the next critical question is why? What could cause both engines to fail so quickly? This brings us to 3 leading theories currently being discussed regarding the root cause of such a catastrophic power loss.
Let's break them down.
The first one, and it's quite popular among some experts, is fuel contamination. S.J. Miralatar, who used to be the Deputy Director of National Aerospace Laboratories, he believes fuel contamination is a strong possibility. He suggests that contaminated fuel could have led to either dangerously low thrust generation, not enough power to climb, or perhaps a complete and rapid failure of both engines simultaneously.
Okay.
Neil Hansford from Strategic Aviation Solutions Consultancy, he agrees. He stated that even though the fuel tanks were reported full, contamination could cause clogging and fuel blockage within the delicate engine components, essentially starving the engines of usable fuel and leading to that power loss.
And fuel contamination is a serious, though maybe often overlooked, risk in aviation. It can come from various sources. Water is a big one, which can freeze at altitude and block lines. Microscopic debris, like clay, rust, dirt from storage tanks or pipes. Even microbial growth bacteria, fungus inside the fuel system, which can form a kind of sludge.
Sludge in jet fuel.
Yeah. And the particularly nasty cause is if diesel exhaust fluid somehow gets mixed with jet fuel. It creates these non-soluble crystals that can rapidly clog fuel lines and filters, literally choking the engines. It's not just about having dirty fuel, it's about compromised fuel chemistry that can have immediate devastating effects on engine performance.
And there's actually a precedent for this, which makes the theory seem even more credible. Back in March 2019, a Boeing 787 flying in Japan actually experienced a dual engine malfunction because of fuel contamination. Thankfully, in that case, the pilots were at altitude and had time. They were able to land safely.
Okay, so it has happened before on this aircraft type.
Yes. And the key takeaway from that incident was the absolute critical role of fuel quality. So if this theory is proven true for AI-171, it would point the blame directly towards the fuel suppliers at Ahmedabad airport, companies like Indian Oil, Bharat Petroleum, Reliance. It would imply inadequate fuel testing, laxes in quality control, which is just an absolute critical safety step in aviation. Every drop of fuel has to be pure and uncompromised.
And this really highlights a profound vulnerability in the whole aviation ecosystem, doesn't it? An aircraft's performance isn't solely dependent on how it was built or maintained. External factors like fuel quality, handled by third parties, can have immediate and devastating consequences. It just underscores the rigorous standards needed at every single point in the supply chain, because one failure there can unravel the entire safety net.
Okay, so that's fuel contamination. The second major possibility being discussed is total electrical failure. A senior pilot, speaking anonymously to the Times of India, suggested that maybe the plane's variable frequency starter generators, the VFSGs, might have failed.
The main electrical generators.
Exactly. These generators are vital. They're the primary source of electrical power for pretty much everything on the aircraft: cockpit displays, environmental controls, communications, and crucially, they provide the electrical power needed to start and continuously run the engine's control systems. If they failed, then the electronic engine controls, the EECs, which are basically the computer brains managing engine operation and thrust, they would stop working. So even if the engines were still physically capable of running, the pilots wouldn't be able to control the thrust because the normal flight controls, the electronic signals, would be dead. The engines would become unresponsive to pilot commands.
That's a terrifying scenario. It essentially robs the pilots of their primary means of controlling the aircraft's power. Now, auxiliary power units, APUs, they're designed as backups for exactly these kinds of electrical failures. They provide emergency electricity to critical systems.
Right, the backup generator.
But they can take up to 90 seconds sometimes to start up and stabilize, to come online fully. That's a crucial window of time. AI-171 tragically didn't have that 90 seconds given its low altitude and how quickly things went wrong. If both the main generators and the APU are compromised simultaneously, or if the APU can't start fast enough, the pilots are left in an extremely challenging, almost impossible situation, unable to command the engines.
And the history here is particularly relevant for the Dreamliner, isn't it? Back in 2013, those two separate Japanese Airlines Dreamliners experienced serious battery failures. One had smoke filling the cockpit, the other actually had a fire that melted bolts connecting the battery. Both led to emergency landings.
I remember that well. Major news.
Those incidents were ultimately attributed by investigators to manufacturing defects within Boeing's lithium-ion battery system design. And that, as we mentioned, led to the unprecedented global grounding of the entire 787 Dreamliner fleet for months until the issues were supposedly fixed and a redesigned battery system was implemented. The fact that AI-171 involved a Dreamliner and battery or electrical issues were part of its known historical problems. It certainly raises red flags for investigators looking into a possible total electrical failure scenario.
That global grounding was a truly monumental event in aviation history. It signaled a severe systemic issue with a brand new, technologically advanced aircraft type. It really demonstrated that even with cutting-edge tech, fundamental design flaws can emerge and compromise safety on a global scale. The ghost of those past electrical failures would certainly loom large in the minds of investigators looking at AI-171.
Which brings us to the third major theory, Mechanical error, potentially linked to a manufacturing defect or maybe a maintenance failure. Just general mechanical errors, possibly originating from how the plane was built or maintained, could absolutely cause engine failure.
Yeah.
For instance, back in 2020, Norwegian Airlines very publicly accused Boeing of numerous engine problems with their fleet of Dreamliners. They were facing issues like frequent engine component failures leading to flight diversions. They had to close entire routes because the planes weren't reliable enough. They faced frequent and costly engine replacements, and in one notable case, they even prematurely scrapped a 10-year-old Dreamliner because it had become just too expensive to keep fixing due to recurring technical problems.
So a pattern of mechanical vulnerability, at least for some operators.
It seems so. This demonstrates a pattern, yeah, of mechanical issues in some Dreamliner operations.
But despite these documented operational headaches for some airlines, the 787 Dreamliner overall has long been considered one of the safest aircraft types flying globally, largely because, until AI-171, it had never, ever been involved in a fatal crash.
That's right.
So this makes the AI-171 tragedy a grim historical first for the Dreamliner fleet. It fundamentally alters its previously unblemished fatal accident record and puts immense pressure, understandably, on Boeing.
This crash is absolutely a pivotal moment for the Dreamliner, yeah. And the distribution of blame, depending on what the final investigation finds, becomes pretty clear-cut, doesn't it? If the crash resulted primarily from a manufacturing defect, say, an electrical system flaw baked in from the start, or a mechanical component that failed due to poor design or production, then the blame would fall squarely entirely on Boeing, the manufacturer.
Right. Product liability.
However, if it turns out to be a maintenance failure, a lapse in inspecting critical parts, improper repairs, maybe incorrect servicing procedures, then the responsibility would shift towards Air India Engineering Services Limited. Now, it's important to note this gets a bit complex. While Air India, the airline, is now owned by the Tata Group, Air India Engineering Services Limited is still a separate government-owned company. And they are responsible for maintaining the majority of Air India's 787 Dreamliners. Creates a kind of complicated web of oversight and responsibility.
That is complex. So you have the manufacturer, the airline operator, and a separate state-owned maintenance provider all potentially involved.
Exactly. It's dense material, isn't it? But it's so crucial. What really stands out here is how each of these theories, fuel, electrical, mechanical maintenance, points to different vulnerabilities in the system. Whether it's the external fuel supply chain, the internal design of the electrical systems, or even the fundamental build quality of the aircraft itself and the ongoing maintenance protocols. It just highlights this complex web of responsibility in modern aviation. A failure at almost any point can have these catastrophic consequences.
Absolutely. What's fascinating, or perhaps chilling, is that each of these theories involves a potential cascading failure. Modern aircraft, as we keep saying, have backups for backups. For a total power loss or a dual engine failure to occur, especially within 30 seconds of takeoff, it really suggests multiple layers of protection either failed simultaneously or were somehow compromised right from the very beginning. This moves us beyond considering just isolated malfunctions to investigating a full systemic collapse where several critical systems appear to have stopped working all at once.
So this deep dive has really started to uncover some disturbing patterns, hasn't it? Going beyond just this single tragic incident to reveal maybe a series of historical issues, both with the aircraft manufacturer, Boeing, and perhaps with the airline itself, Air India. First, let's look a bit closer at the specific aircraft involved in the AI-171 crash, VTANT.
Right, the history we touched on earlier.
We know it had that prior fuel leak incident back in November 2021, forcing an emergency landing, and it reportedly suffered from those issues common to other early Dreamliners, like recurring windshield cracks and, as we discussed, battery overheating issues that, again, led to the global 787 grounding way back in 2013.
And critically, those detailed pre-crash observations from the passenger, Akash Vatsa, about the non-functional AC, the dead entertainment systems, the malfunctioning controls. On this very plane, right before it took off for its final flight, they further highlight potential systemic issues specific to this airframe.
Right, they weren't just minor annoyances.
No, they weren't just cosmetic discomforts. They hinted at underlying power distribution problems, maybe connectivity issues, or perhaps deeper electrical faults that could have been, in hindsight, indicators of compromised systems about to fail catastrophically.
Exactly. And then when we look at its maintenance history, it raises even more questions, doesn't it? Its last comprehensive check, a major C check or D check where they practically strip the plane down and inspect everything thoroughly. That was 2 years ago, back in June 2023.
2 years prior. Okay.
Now, its right engine was repaired more recently in March 2025, and its left engine was inspected in April 2025, so just months before the crash. But the next full comprehensive check wasn't actually scheduled until December 2025.
Hmm.
This raises questions maybe about the thoroughness and frequency of maintenance, especially for an aircraft with a known documented history of issues. Is a standard 2-year interval for a major check sufficient for a plane with such a problematic past?
Well, a comprehensive check interval of around 2 years is fairly standard industry practice for many aircraft types. But if a specific aircraft has a known history of particular recurring issues, like this one apparently did, there's always a critical question for the airline and regulators. Should more frequent, or perhaps more specific targeted checks be mandated for that particular airframe?
Makes sense.
And the timeline of that engine work just months before the crash. That's also something investigators will scrutinize incredibly heavily. Was the work performed correctly? Was it truly comprehensive? Or were there perhaps underlying issues that were missed or maybe not fully addressed during those recent inspections or repairs?
So many questions there. Now, let's pivot slightly and talk about Boeing's broader manufacturing woes and the really serious allegations that have surfaced over the years, painting a pretty disturbing picture. An Al Jazeera investigation, for instance, claimed that the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, the ultimate authority on airworthiness in the U.S., controversially greenlit features like those lithium-ion batteries in the Dreamliner without sufficiently rigorous testing. This was despite actual battery failures happening twice within days of the plane entering service.
Right.
That's a significant claim regarding regulatory oversight, isn't it? Suggesting maybe pressure to rush a new product to market might have overshadowed standard safety protocols.
That's a profoundly critical point because the FAA is supposed to be the ultimate guarantor of air safety, certainly for U.S. manufactured planes. If there are credible allegations of inadequate testing or, say, undue industry pressure influencing certification decisions, it profoundly undermines public trust, not just in Boeing, but potentially in the entire regulatory process designed to keep us safe when we fly.
And it gets even more concerning when you hear the whistleblower claims. Current and former Boeing employees have made very serious allegations of negligence, specifically in Dreamliner manufacturing. They've claimed that bad or substandard parts were routinely used to meet production quotas, that metal debris shavings, tools, things like that, was sometimes carelessly left inside planes during assembly near critical wiring, and that workers felt pressured not to report violations, fostering a culture of silence over safety.
A don't rock the boat culture.
Seems like it. In April 2024, just last year, former Boeing engineer Sam Salahpour, who worked specifically on the Dreamliner program, he filed a formal complaint with the FAA. He stated quite bluntly that Dreamliner fuselage parts were being improperly assembled, fastened together with excessive force, posing a direct risk of the plane potentially breaking apart mid-air over time due to fatigue stress.
Wow.
He claimed parts from different suppliers didn't fit together properly, potentially a cost-cutting measure, and that his supervisors allegedly ignored his warnings, even threatened him when he raised these critical safety concerns internally.
This is just an alarming and sadly consistent pattern of allegations, isn't it? It suggests a deeply troubling culture where maybe production speed or cost cutting was systematically prioritized over fundamental safety protocols. When employees on the factory floor, the very people building these complex machines, raise such serious concerns and feel like they're being ignored or shut down, it points to a profound systemic issue within the company's internal quality control and safety reporting mechanisms.
Indeed. A 2019 New York Times investigation cited another technician, Joseph Clayton, finding potentially dangerous metal slivers near cockpit wiring. A discovery so unsettling that it led him to tell his own wife never ever to fly on a Dreamliner.
From an insider, that's chilling.
And then there's John Barnett, a former Boeing quality manager with over 30 years at the company. He made the incredibly damning statement that, in his view, not one plane coming out of Boeing's Charleston, South Carolina factory where Dreamliners are assembled was safe or airworthy.
An incredible condemnation.
Just an unbelievable statement from someone in his position. An Al Jazeera undercover worker, posing as an employee, even asked 15 colleagues at the Charleston plant if they would personally fly on a Dreamliner built there. A shocking 10 out of 15 flatly refused, citing quality concerns, expressing a deep lack of trust in the safety of their own product.
Look, these aren't just isolated complaints from maybe disgruntled employees. They paint a consistent, deeply troubling picture from multiple independent sources inside the company. It suggests deeply entrenched issues with manufacturing quality control and maybe a systemic disregard for internal warnings over several years. Such allegations, if substantiated, point to foundational weaknesses right at the very origin of the aircraft's existence.
It's truly shocking to hear laid out like that. And John Barnett, the former quality manager, he had previously made a sort of chilling prophecy, didn't he? Stating that crashes resulting from this kind of alleged manufacturing negligence could take maybe 10 to 12 years to manifest, as the hidden flaws slowly develop into critical failures under operational stress.
And AI-171.
The AI-171 aircraft, tragically, was 11 years old, right in that window. What's even more specific and worrying for Air India is a statement from Cynthia Kitchens. She was another former quality manager at Boeing's Charleston factory, working there from 2009 to 2016. She stated that 11 specific Dreamliners delivered in the 2012-2013 timeframe had such severe quality issues that they literally caused her sleepless nights, knowing the potential danger they posed.
11 specific planes flagged internally.
Yes. And incredibly, she alleged that 6 of these problematic aircraft were sold directly to Air India. When she raised her profound concerns about these planes with her boss, his alleged response was just chilling. According to her, he said, "They're all going overseas. What, are you serious? These will only be given to developing countries' airlines."
Oh my goodness.
Implying essentially a deeply unsettling, maybe even discriminatory two-tiered safety standard for international buyers versus domestic ones. The crashed AI-171 aircraft, VTANT, was delivered on January 31st, 2014, falling squarely within this period of heightened concern raised by Kitchens.
To put that in perspective, such a statement, if true, suggests a profound ethical and safety lapse at high levels within the manufacturing process, potentially viewing some markets, some airlines, as less critical when it comes to adhering to the absolute highest safety standards. It just underscores that core principle in complex systems we talked about. Accidents are rarely caused by just one single point of failure.
Right.
They're almost always the result of multiple, compounding errors and systemic vulnerabilities. Stretching from design and manufacturing right through to maintenance and operational pressures, these allegations against Boeing, if proven true, point to potentially dangerous foundational weaknesses originating right at the factory, maybe driven by a dangerous prioritizing of profit or schedule over passenger safety.
And critics worldwide have been accusing Boeing of prioritizing profits over safety for years now, haven't they? Taking shortcuts, they allege, that lead directly to crashes. We saw this tragically exemplified by the 2 Boeing 737 MAX crashes, Lion Air in October 2018, and Ethiopian Airlines in March 2019, which together killed 346 people.
The MCS issue.
Exactly. Those crashes were linked directly to a flawed flight control system, the MCS, that Boeing had implemented, arguably without sufficient pilot training or transparency. It repeatedly forced the aircraft nose down, overriding pilot inputs, leading to uncontrollable dives. The tragedy resulted in a staggering $1.1 billion settlement with the U.S. Justice Department for deceiving regulators, and of course the global grounding of the entire 737 AX fleet for almost 2 years. It really cemented a public perception, fair or not, that Boeing's long-vaunted safety culture was potentially in serious decline.
Now, while Boeing's manufacturing issues are clearly a major factor under intense scrutiny in this AI-171 incident, it's also really important to examine Air India's own operational environment and maintenance challenges. Boeing delivers its planes to many airlines globally. And while some others have certainly faced issues with the Dreamliner, not all of them experience such recurring critical problems or, tragically, end up with a crash like this.
That's a crucial distinction, yeah.
It raises important questions about Air India's internal practices, its specific maintenance regimen for its 787 fleet, and maybe its overall operational culture.
That's fair. For example, even after the Tata Group took over Air India a few years ago, aiming to revitalize the airline, live it up to global standards, reports suggest problems persist within the airline's day-to-day operations. Pilots, for instance, have claimed insufficient rest between flights, leading to dangerous levels of fatigue, which we know can severely compromise decision-making and reaction times in the cockpit.
Fatigue is a huge safety issue.
We saw this manifest dramatically just last year, in May 2024, when around 300 Air India Express crew members staged a mass sick leave, even turning off their phones, in protest over what they described as poor rostering, poor working conditions, and chronic fatigue.
Wow, 300 crew. That's significant disruption.
Furthermore, a DGCA audit, that's India's aviation regulator, conducted in July 2023, found evidence that Air India was actually submitting fake internal audit reports. 13 randomly checked safety points, mandated checks, were found never to have been actually audited in reality, despite reports saying they were.
That's a major breach of trust and regulation.
It's a severe breach of regulatory compliance, yeah. And it raises grave questions about the airline's commitment to genuine internal safety oversight. And just recently, remember, there was that incident where 5 passengers and 2 crew members fell ill mid-air on a London-Mumbai flight, suspected to be food poisoning from the airline catering. While different, it still highlights maybe broader operational vigilance concerns.
So these operational issues, the internal audit findings at Air India, combined with the manufacturing concerns about this specific Dreamliner model and its own troubled history, it creates a very complex and, frankly, troubling picture. It really highlights that even a statistically safe aircraft type can potentially be compromised by systemic issues within the airline's own operations, its maintenance culture, its safety culture.
It's the whole system.
Exactly. This accident is likely a confluence, a coming together of multiple, perhaps independent failures, stretching maybe from the factory floor right through to the flight crew's operating environment, creating this perilous chain of events. Accidents like AI-171 serve as such stark reminders that safety isn't a destination you reach. It's a continuous process. It demands unwavering vigilance at every single stage, from initial design and manufacturing through to the day-to-day operations and maintenance of every single aircraft, every single flight. There are rarely simple answers, but rather layers and layers of causality to unpeel.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive, it's just crucial to reiterate that plane crashes are rarely, if ever, due to just one single mistake or one isolated mechanical failure. They almost always involve multiple layers of failure, where primary systems and then tragically their supposed backup systems also fail, leading to that catastrophic breakdown of redundancy.
The holes in the Swiss cheese, lining up, as they say in safety science.
Exactly. We are currently awaiting a preliminary report from the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. That's expected around July 12, 2025, which is 30 days after the crash. Standard procedure. This initial report should offer more concrete insights into the likely primary causes based on the initial analysis of the black boxes and wreckage.
And that preliminary report will be a vital first step, yes. But it's also important for everyone listening to remember that these kinds of complex investigations are exhaustive. They can take many months, sometimes even years, to reach truly definitive conclusions. The ultimate goal isn't just to assign blame, though accountability is important. It's to understand precisely what went wrong at every level, technical, human, organizational, regulatory, continue, so that effective new safety measures can be implemented globally to prevent similar tragedies from ever happening again.
A long process.
It's a continuous, painstaking process, learning from catastrophe.
Absolutely. And that leaves us, I think, with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, our listener. Given everything we've discussed, the revelations about potential manufacturing shortcuts, the serious allegations of corporate negligence, the questions around regulatory oversight, the possibility of critical maintenance lapses involving various entities, how does a tragedy like AI-171 force us to reevaluate our fundamental trust in the complex systems designed to keep us safe when we fly?
That's a heavy question.
It is. And perhaps more profoundly, what can we all learn from the meticulous, evidence-based way these complex investigations are conducted? Not just to understand what happened in this specific awful event, but to draw lessons that help ensure such devastating failures are not only fully understood, but fundamentally are never, ever repeated.